Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Daniela. I am a Word Up volunteer, longtime Word Up volunteer since 2011. Hello to everybody on Zoom as well. Thank you for joining us. Just briefly, how many people have never been here? Okay. And how many people have never been to Word Up or here? Okay. That's most everybody, actually. So just briefly, so that you know what this place is. Recirculation, which is the name of this spot, is a kind of offshoot of Word Up. Word Up Community Bookshop and Art Space is located on 165th Street and Amsterdam Avenue, which is close by. And it started in 2011 as a pop-up shop. It was supposed to be around for just a month, and it ended up sticking around for the next almost 13 years. It'll be 13 years in June. We shifted locations. It was run by a collective of volunteers, and it is still primarily run by a collective of volunteers. We have a few staff members now. The founder of Word Up, Veronica Liu, is standing in the back here. She is also among, if not the principal initiator of this space, recirculation. At Word Up, we have used books and new books. We have events of all sorts, music, poetry readings, gatherings. You can essentially fill out a form and say you want to organize an event, and you can do it there. And recirculation is primarily used books. I think if not all used books, we might have a couple of new things floating around. But it started in 2020, and most of the books that are here, or at least were here at the beginning, were gifted to us by a former volunteer of Word Up who passed away from COVID. So this space, when it opened in 2020, allowed us to bring people back in because it was bigger than the spot on 165th in Amsterdam. It allowed us to social distance, but also come back together. And now it's here to stay. Word Up is a very special place, and it really only continues to exist because people donate, people buy books, people come to our events. And then we also get grants when we're lucky, but that also takes time and labor. So anything you can do to help recirculation and Word Up continue to grow is much appreciated. This particular event was my initiative. It's been a very difficult time for so many of us, I know, and it's been hard to know exactly what to do here. And I can't really express my gratitude for these two people being here and agreeing to share their experience and to talk when it's become incredibly hard to talk about something like how to work together for something that we care about. So I will just read their bios before I emote too much, in case you didn't read them yourselves. And these bios are actually a bit selective, so there's a lot more to these individuals than I'm about to read, but hopefully you'll hear more when they speak. Aziz Abu Sarah is a peace builder, cultural educator, entrepreneur, author, and international speaker. Aziz's educational and conflict resolution work throughout the world has earned him the titles of National Geographic Explorer and TED Fellow. He has been named one of the 500 most influential Muslims in the world by the Royal Strategic Center in Jordan each year since 2010. His book, Crossing Boundaries, A Traveler's Guide to World Peace, was released in July 2020. Co-author of the 2018 publication, Strangers, Neighbors, Friends, Muslim, Christian, Jewish Reflections on Compassion and Peace, Aziz continues to be at the forefront of peace and reconciliation efforts in conflict zones. Aziz has worked in 60 countries, including Afghanistan, Colombia, Syria, and the Balkans. He has served as executive director at the Center for World Religions, Diplomacy and Conflict Resolution, George Mason University, and as the chairman for the Parents Circle Family Forum, representing the organization at international governmental organizations such as the European Parliament. He is the co-founder of Interact International, a nonprofit advancing sustainability, education, and cross-cultural connections. This is Elik Elhanan served in a special forces unit in the IDF from 1995 to 1998, extensively in South Lebanon, the West Bank, and Gaza. In 1997, his 14-year-old sister was killed by a suicide bomber in Jerusalem. Elik is also a military refuser. He joined Courage to Refuse in 2002, and in 2005 was a co-founder of the Israeli-Palestinian group Combatants for Peace. Elik served as the Israeli director of the group in 2006 to 2007, and besides Combatants for Peace, Elik's peace activism included many other initiatives and organizations, a longtime member of the Parents Circle Families Forum. Elik joined following his father, Rami Elhanan, in 2000. In 2012, Elik participated in the attempt of the Swedish boat SV Estelle to break the Israeli blockade of Gaza. He also received his PhD, minor point, in Middle East Studies from Columbia University and is currently teaching at City College in New York. This is Elik. The format of the event will be that Aziz will share his story, a version of his story. Elik will share a version of his story. They will talk about their work and what's going on and how it's affecting them and how they're thinking through things together. And then we'll have some time for questions. Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry. These two books are here for sale. They're at the front.
Did you all hear that? Thank you. Thank you, Danielle, for inviting us, and thank you, everyone, for being here and joining us tonight. It's not an easy time to talk about the work we do, but it is important that we do that. I do want to start by saying Elik and I are not new to doing this together. We met over 20 years ago, and at the time when I joined the Parent Circle, I think we pretty much came to the Parent Circle at the same time, and then we both on the board of the American Friends of the Combatants for Peace, so we continue to work together, and we'll talk more about that. So you've seen almost the evolution also of our relationship, of our friendship. I grew up in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem. I always thought somewhat of a normal childhood, but there is really no normal childhood if you grow up in East Jerusalem. But you don't know that as a kid. And I'll give you a quick example. When you were a kid and you went to school, what was the most important thing for you to take with you to school? Or what did your mother give you to take with you to school? Lunch. Okay, that's good. What else? Backpack, yeah. What do you put in the backpack? Books, pencils, all good stuff. My mom gave me something else. Let's see if you can guess. Anybody? What would a Palestinian mother have to give her son in the morning going to school?
A kiss.
A kiss would be good. Thank you. She did, but something else. No, when I was 6 or 7, I didn't need to carry those. Something to protect myself. An onion. No, not a rock. An onion, you're right. Who got that? Nice. And the reason she did give me an onion is I came back home after the first Intifada had started, and I told my mom, listen, I know you think education is really an important thing. It's not worth dying for. And we were fired at tear gas coming back from school, and I thought I'm gonna die. I literally thought I'm gonna suffocate. And I thought, yeah, school is not worth it. And my mom had to then convince me to go to school the next day. And her way in convincing me was to give me an onion and say, you keep this with you. If there are tear gas, you put the onion close to your nose and it will help you not suffocate. Here, I'm giving you a crash course on protesting in case you need it here in New York. But that's what normal childhood for me was. When I was 9 years old, a group of soldiers came into our home, arrested my older brother, who was 9 years older than me, Taysir, took him to interrogation. We didn't know where he was for over a couple of weeks. And eventually I still remember my dad going to the Red Cross and the Red Cross trying to convince the Israeli military to tell us where he was. We got zero response. But eventually we found out he was accused of throwing rocks at Israeli cars, and he was sentenced for just under a year in prison. He was released before his sentence was, I think, completed, mainly because his health has gotten very bad. Through the interrogation, he was beaten up, so he would confess to the charges, which caused internal injuries. And by the time he was released from prison, those injuries have become pretty bad. Took him to hospital, had a surgery, and ended up dying soon after the surgery as a result of the injuries. And he was 19, his name is Taysir. I was 10 years old when that happened. And it's quite a powerful thing. It changes your life completely. It takes you on a totally different trajectory. And even today, as I see so many kids losing family, losing brothers, losing parents, it reminds me of myself, because I didn't, I've paid attention to the conflict. Yeah, the tear gas, I threw a couple of rocks here and there, but I wasn't really as involved. I didn't have the anger. I didn't have the pain. I didn't have the bitters. I didn't have the determination. And the moment my brother was killed, that all changed. To me, it became then a duty. It became, if you killed my brother, I need to fight you. And for the next 8 years, that was all I cared about. I remember my grades going from A plus, best student in the class, to C, if I'm lucky, B, because education became less important. And that's what, I focused on for the next 8 years. I ended up having a major change in my perception. I was 18 when I went to study Hebrew in an ulpan, where I met the first time Israelis who were not settlers and were not soldiers. But I also met Israelis and Jewish people who recognized me, recognized my story, recognized my pain, recognized where I come from. And for the past 18 years of my life, I did not have those. Even when you meet a soldier at a checkpoint and he's nice and he smiles and he says, yeah, you can go through, still carrying a gun. That's not a dialogue. That's not something I'm like, oh, I'm so grateful. He's so nice to me. That doesn't change really your perception, because he still can tell you you can pass through. While in my Hebrew class, I've had a teacher who was incredible. And not only did she taught us Hebrew, she also brought my story to the students. She also recognized where I come from. She recognized the Palestinian story. And I've never at that point have heard an Israeli do that before. And I think I had this switch where when I was 10 years old, I felt it's a duty. You have no choice but to fight back. If somebody kills your brother, you go and hurt them as well. To suddenly believing, no, I do have a choice. What you do doesn't dictate how I must respond. I still have the full power in how I respond to your action. And that's quite a redeeming thing. And we hear it today a lot. This is happening because of that. We can go into Gaza in a few minutes, but for me, that was very important to realize. There's no excuse for my own actions because of what somebody else does. You still have the power to make your own choices. And from there, I ended up working with people like Elik and other friends, Eli here, and other friends, to realizing that this really shouldn't be anymore for me, Israelis versus Palestinians, or Muslims and Christians versus Jews, or whatever in Palestine, but rather it's those of us who believe in justice, those of us who believe in equality, those of us who believe in dignity of everyone, and those who don't. And the hope is to convince those who don't to join us. And so for me, it's no brainer that I partner with Elik, even though he's Israeli, because we are on the same side. We're not here to talk about being on opposite sides. We understood that coming together make us stronger because we resist together. We stand against occupation together. We stand for equality together. We stand for people's lives together. And when I look at what's happening in Gaza today, I think of all these kids who are exactly where I was when I was 10 years old, and how these kids gonna grow up. These were when you think of 2014, when there was one of the bigger um, bombings in Gaza, those were the kids that were then. What happened to them? Where did they end up? And I can bet you many of them are the ones who ended up picking up guns and saying, I want to fight. It's a cycle. And it's a cycle that we know how it ends, and we always warn against it. And yet there's this kind of like tribalism. It's like, well, we have to go through this direction. Um, since October 7th, I'll just mention that and then pass to Elik, and then we'll talk about what we do. But since October 7th, for me, it's been extremely, extremely hard. This is probably the angriest I've been. And I think anger is a good thing, is not necessarily bad, because it keeps fire on. And I'm angry because I see, one, I have friends who've been hurt. I have families of friends who've been hurt, and on both sides. I have Israeli friends who lost family members, and I have Palestinian friends from Gaza who lost family members. My family's still in Jerusalem. They are terrified with settlers going crazy, with soldiers and police officers feeling complete impunity to anything they do. And that's terrifying. Watching, like you, I watch everything coming out from the images that's coming out, the stories that's coming out. It's absolutely heartbreaking, but also it's heartbreaking to see what's happening even in our movement, in the peace movement, where we are at a place where some, I think, have completely abandoned the belief of working together, of empathy, of understanding where somebody's pain comes from, where some feel they can go and fight in the war and go to Gaza and put on the uniform and then come back the next day and call you and say, oh, can we have a dialogue? Which is extremely, extremely hard to do. I've talked to Israeli activists who felt that Palestinians have not recognized what happened on October 7th. And this has torn this movement apart. I think there are many people who are much more skeptical today than they were before. But it's exactly because of that it's important for us to come together and say, yes, we are losing people. Yes, this is a very hard time. We shouldn't put our heads in the sand and say, we are the majority and we all doing good. Then I'll be lying to you if I say that. But there are some of us who are fully committed to work together. And I think us being here is an example for that. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this challenge that the peace movement is having in these days. Yeah, I'll pass to Elik. Now that I have a microphone, I'll keep interrupting you.
Feel free. Thank you very much, Aziz, and thank all of you. Thanks, Daniela, for organizing this. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be here. like Aziz said, we've been doing this for a very, very long time. And unlike the popular belief, this is not an easy work, and it's not fun work, definitely not lucrative work, but it is work that we think is extremely important. It is, for me, a personal and moral duty, because I mean, this type of dialogue and this type of relationship that we have, I think, signals to the only possible horizon that can be out of that situation. And that horizon is, well, Israeli-Palestinian solidarity, Israeli-Palestinian joint life on the piece of land that we share. No other solution is viable. No side will disappear. No side will be eliminated. And therefore, going through these cycles of violence to come back exactly to where we've been so many times before, I mean, might seem as if it's ordained. For us who've already paid such a price, I mean, we know it's not ordained. It's the decisions of people, and this is the outcomes of policies. And if we can intervene in any way to kind of short circuit this procedure, then we must. And this is exactly why I'm here today. As Aziz said, I mean, I've been very distraught and very in a great deal of pain since October 7th. And I mean, I saw what Aziz was talking about, so many friends and comrades who are backsliding, who are, I mean, in a sense, happy or relieved to let go of this heavy and unpleasant utopia of joint life. It's so much nicer to withdraw and to confine yourself within your own, in those safe spaces where everybody kind of thinks the same and chants the same, and you're not challenged, and you're not undone, and you're not attacked. But I think, and as I said, we know that in a sense better than most. I mean, we don't have the privilege to do that. I will say in a few words, I'll tell my story, how I got here, and also, yeah, and this will kind of bring us back to kind of Combatants for Peace and the work we do and the importance of this work. As you already heard, I mean, I'm Israeli, Jewish from Jerusalem. I grew up not that far from Aziz in Jerusalem, but in a completely different universe where, I mean, I had no idea or no way of apprehending or approaching the reality that Aziz was talking about. I, of course, also lived during first Intifada in Jerusalem, but again, this was incidental in my life, not the very central thing that we were living, the privilege of the occupier. As an Israeli young man, I joined the army when I was 18. I volunteered. I served in a special forces unit in the IDF in a certain sense, believing this was what was expected of me. This was kind of a sort of realization that someone like me was meant to pursue. I won't bore you with the whole process of my disillusionment, but let's just say it occurred. And I was disillusioned pretty early in that process, but still, I mean, like many of us know, I mean, the fact that one is disillusioned or one that one sees things differently doesn't really call one into action. You don't really have to change your life, even if you know they're going the wrong way. What happened to me that, in a sense, kind of made me take a full stop was the murder of my sister at the hands of Hamas militants in 1997. She was 14 years old when she was killed. It was the first day of school. She went downtown with a few other friends to buy school books and, I don't know, hang out, and unfortunately found themselves very close to three other very young men, Palestinian, who killed themselves in the city center, taking with them six Israelis, my sister, two of her friends, and a number of others. At that time, I was an IDF soldier. I was highly trained. I was highly motivated, very committed to striking our enemies wherever they may be, except, of course, I mean, where it mattered or where I could help or where I could protect. And not that that moved me into action. What moved me, what really changed my mind in a way, was the fact that around me, everyone, my commanders, my peers, my friends, teachers, everybody expected me, in a sense, to find solace, to find reason, to find meaning in the military service, in violence, in taking the life of some other men, or I mean women or children, as we do, in Lebanon, in the West Bank, or anywhere else. This kind of insane mathematics, where I change the body of my sister for the body of someone else, I mean, didn't fly very well with me, and I mean, I kind of withdrew from this world. Again, I wouldn't say that this is the moment I decided to take action. I withdrew. This was a very personal decision. This was a very internal decision, not one that I shared, kind of a quiet refusal, a quiet disobedience. That was really more melancholy than anything else, didn't really have any sort of horizon or any sort of political thinking behind it, just a decision that I'm not taking part in this anymore. I found some niche thing to do in the army until I ran out my days, and the day I finished the army, I left Israel with the clear intention not to return and not to be involved with that. I mean, this, of course, was not a decision I could keep. In October 2000, when Ariel Sharon, for those of you who remember, acted out his provocation and started the bloody Second Intifada. The scale of the violence, the magnitude of the killing and the hate that was inspired on all sides, that, in a sense, really called me back into kind of activist circles. My father has already been a part of the parent circle, and I joined him on a number of activities, and I started seeing the reason there why it's important to act, why it's important to raise your voice, to get involved. And in that context, when in the year in 2002, a group of 50 Israeli reserve soldiers, officers and soldiers, decided to refuse to serve in the occupied territories, I joined that group. I believe that it's important that I'll put my name on the letter, that people will know that publicly I am not willing to be part of that. And I did that. It wasn't much. It didn't cost me a lot. I was living in France at the time, so it was kind of maybe a symbolic gesture. But as it happened, I was called to represent this group and to talk about Israeli conscientious objectors and Israeli refuseniks in all kinds of demonstrations that took place in Paris at the time. And I think in one of those demonstrations, me and my brother used to do it, go and talk in them and say a few words about why we refused, etc. Something happened. And that was something that, in a sense, really changed my life and put my whole trajectory put my life on a different trajectory. And that is coming down from one of these stages, saying these things that we say, feeling kind of cynical and kind of bitter about this. An elderly Arab man came up to me and he said, "Can I shake your hand?" And I said, "Yeah, of course, sure." And he said, "I just want you to know, I'm a former PFLP member. I fought Israelis, I fought Israeli soldiers. I never thought I'd shake a hand of one. But what you just said, good for you." And I never felt this heard, I never felt this seen, and I never felt this relief from the burden of kind of guilt, of violence, of anger that I was carrying with me. From that encounter, we met other Palestinians in Paris. We met representatives from the General Union of Palestinian Students. We started working together, and we started getting acquainted with the power of joint solidarity, joint resistance, understanding what there is there that we can give one another. I became very much involved in the work of the parent circle, where I knew Aziz and many other people. And it is this kind of familiarity with the joint work that led me and a group of others to create Combatants for Peace, a group where, again, Israelis and Palestinians who participated in the armed struggle met and initially for dialogue, etc. But it grew to become, nearly 20 years ago. We're still around. We first met for the first time nearly 20 years ago. It grew up to be one of the most substantial activist groups in Israel-Palestine at the moment. And this is, in a sense, what I have to say. Very much, and I think like people here and in Israel, I grew up on this myth of self-reliance and being a person on my own, autonomous, sovereign. It is with my reason and my faculty that I govern my life. And also going through the army, special forces, this type of attitude of I can take care of things was very, very powerful in my life. When you're hurt, when you're devastated, when my sister was killed, this thing is undone. You understand how small, how lonely, how vulnerable people might be. And when there's no one around to offer you anything except more of that, there's nothing but despair that is left. However, when I met people like Aziz, when I met people like Suleiman Al-Khatib or Bassam Aramin or many, many of the people that I came to know through this work, you receive something. I knew what a Palestinian kid has to bring to school because actually my mother used this word in her research. I also know why Aziz went to study Hebrew, which he didn't tell you here, about the courage people have to traverse lines and cultural boundaries. I know how Bassam Aramin decided to abandon the way of the armed struggle after learning about the story of the Holocaust. I actually remember very, very well Aziz's father in a parent circle meeting asking if, the Holocaust is true, and the outrage that was there. And he said, no, because if it's true, it's terrible. I just hear all the time that it's not true. And this was like the thing that launched this amazing project that we had, where Israelis learned about the Palestinian disaster and Palestinians learned the details and the personal stories of Holocaust survivors among the members. These conversations, these encounters transform us, make us into people that we never believed we could be. I owe everything that I am to people like Aziz, to the Palestinians that I met, that really challenged me to change. Their courage, their edifying courage made me be someone else, go far beyond anything I ever imagined as the boundaries of my identity. And I think in that sense, there is a huge political promise. We are often criticized because we're ineffective. We don't really have a goal. We don't really have a plan of how to resolve the situation. True, I personally have no idea how to resolve the situation. But what I do know that in our engagement and in our discussion, we signal the horizon of where we want to be. Us living together, working together, that it would be the most natural thing for me to ask Aziz what he thinks if I should go back to the military service or not. As it happened to us in 2006 during the invasion to Lebanon, this is the vision that we are aiming for, that the moral and social counterpart will be, like Aziz, people, like Aziz said, people who support peace and people who support justice, coexistence, oppose the occupation, regardless of other questions, other limiting factors like identity or race or things like that. Of course, this is extremely hard. This is almost unattainable. This is nearly improbable, but we are in a sense a living proof that it can happen. And I'll just say one thing. Of our members, of the active members of Combatants for Peace, people did not go back to the service. People stayed firm in their rejection of the insane criminal violence that is unleashed on Gaza right now. Our members did have, the Palestinian members, the courage and the moral fortitude to see and recognize the pain of the Israeli comrades, and the Israeli comrades did not turn back to killing Palestinians, are not part of the heinous war crime that is taking place every day now in Gaza. And in that sense, I do think we signal something that is worth pursuing, that is really, really worth pursuing. And of course, I mean, this is not something positive or easy. You take on the pain of two nations, two people, if not more. I remember hearing the horrors of October 7 on the Israeli side and immediately being terrified of what is going to be unleashed on friends on the other side. My family is from Kibbutz Be'eri. We spent 30 hours with them on the phone as they were hiding from the Hamas militant on that day. And all I could think about was how in 2014, I spent the whole night on the phone with one of my shipmates from the Estelle, who was with the ISM movement in Shifa Hospital, and saw the soldiers coming and was convinced that he's going to die in protecting Palestinian patients there. And we talked the whole night on the phone, convinced that this will be our last conversation. Thankfully, it wasn't. But this place, being open to pain, being open to vulnerability, accepting the fact that we are dependent and that we need each other to live together and continue, I think this is the one gift that I got from this history, and this is the one promise that we can give other people. Of course, as I said, it's a very hard one. It's a very ungrateful promise. It's a painful promise, and it's very, very, very stands to reason that people would want to turn away from that. But there is no other promise. Nothing else can resolve this situation other than joint Israeli-Palestinian struggle, solidarity, coexistence, living together.
And I did not interrupt you even once. Did we do some questions, or do you want us to keep talking? Because if you don't have questions, we can just have our normal conversations back and forth.
Maybe just a little bit about Combatants for Peace and the family circle, just because for people who aren't familiar with what you do and
I'll speak very briefly about Combatants for Peace. As I say, it's an organization that exists for about nearly 20 years now. We officially launched it in February of 2005, following a period of preparation. As I said, when we think about this thing of mutual recognition and the support we can give each other, I mean, this is precisely and the transformative experience that happened there. I remember the first time that we went to meet one another in Bethlehem. I mean, I know today from our Palestinian friends, and I can tell you for myself, neither group thought they were going to make it home alive. But we did, and we came back transformed. What was supposed to be a joint media declaration became a movement that changes and develops. At the height of our membership, we had hundreds of members on both sides, and the idea is really to bring together these people who use violence against one another, tried in all their might to kill one another, and therefore, in a certain weird sense, can now talk to one another. For the past 20 years, we have dedicated our time to a variety of activities, internal dialogue meetings in order to build the movements, and advocacy in Israel and around the world, and also in a very large part, activism on the ground, activism supporting Palestinian communities, Palestinian struggles, wherever it is needed. Maybe our most kind of well-known and widely attended project is the the Alternative Memorial Day, which we hold on the most sacred of days in Israel, the Israeli Memorial Day for the fallen soldiers. We hold the day where, together with Palestinian partners, we talk about the loss of life and the tragedy on all sides, remembering the uselessness and the pointlessness and how all of it could have been avoided. I was the first speaker in this ceremony in 2006. I mean, it was insane. It was ridiculous. We didn't think we'll get 10 people in the crowd. We got 300 the first time. And it has been growing exponentially ever since. I think it was it was nearly 20,000 people in attendance in the last one that we've had. And we are now preparing for the next one that will be this coming April. We added that, of course. I mean, there is a memorial commemorating the Nakba and the Palestinian catastrophe. And in a sense, all of these are exactly, the project that we try to promote in order to create this space where both sides can see, learn, and acknowledge the pain of the others. Out of, two principles. One, as I told you, I think this encounter with someone else, with the pain of someone else, is edifying, changes you. You are undone. But also in that moment of conversation, a certain trust, a certain camaraderie is built that permits us to talk of really the hardest question. It's not as if we are in complete agreement. It's not as if there are not hard moments. It's not as if we don't want to throw all this away and do something normal for a while. But the commitment, the friendship, and the very, very long mileage of working together stopped that. And there were, countless events. For me in particular, was the murder of Abira Ramin, the daughter of our founder, Palestinian founder, Bassama Ramin, that was shot in the head by Israeli police inside her school. In Anata, refugee camp near Jerusalem. And of course, the policeman never stood trial. Of course, no justice was done. Of course, the family was treated in the worst way possible. And Our understanding as Israelis was that at this point the story ends, because who would want to talk to her? I didn't want to talk to her, for sure. Bassam Aramin did, and the members of Combatants for Peace did. And the movement went through this moment, went through this stage, and came out stronger. We had many, many of these moments during the different operations, and each time, thanks to this circle, thanks to this possibility to speak and discuss and hash things out, we survive, we move forward. Right now, me and Aziz, Gili over there, we are members of the American Friends of the Board of American Friends of Combatants for Peace, which is the body that kind of represents and fundraises for the movement here in the United States. We would be very, very happy to talk to you about what you can do and how you can help our efforts here.
I'll just add couple of things. One, I used to host a radio show in the mid 2000s, and I went to interview Elik about Combatants when it was founded, and did like one of the first journalists, I think, that did it, and then went to one of the protests he did in Anata, if you remember, and got tear gassed again. That was incredible because tons of people showed up, and that was one of those examples. Because the peace rallies used to happen in Tel Aviv, and it's comfortable to do a peace rally in Tel Aviv. For Israelis to come and protest in our own neighborhoods, that wasn't as common. That was something new, and that was changing how co-resistance kind of works together. What does it mean to protest together? Take me to Tel Aviv, or you come and protest with me in my own. Right? And suddenly, you get tear gas with me, and then this became much more common, to the point I remember a few years later I was going to protest in Nabi Saleh, and I'm standing there, and this guy comes like, "Hey, wanna smoke a cigarette with me?" And I'm like, "Okay." And the two of us smoking cigarette as the soldiers shooting tear gas, and then you realize you have to run and drop your cigarette. But it becomes a normal part. Like no part of me was like, "What's this guy doing in Nabi Saleh, getting tear gas with me?" It was so normal, and I think that's when I say we're not an opposite side. That's what I mean. It's not that we only meet to eat hummus together. That nice, we do that too, but that can't be the only way you do stuff together. It must lead to more things. It must lead to actual collaboration, and that's what builds also really that trust and those friendships. When Bassam's daughter was killed, I remember also going out on, wasn't that everyone met and talked, but we were outside the police station day in, day out protesting, because the police decided not to do anything for the soldier who shot her. And there was the support to go to court and to try. And even though we knew we're not going to get the justice we wanted, we stood together. And having the Israelis and the Palestinians doing those protests together did mean a lot. And I know later, even from Arab, Bassam's son, that this eventually is what brought him around. The beginning, it's what drove him away. And then eventually, it's what brought him around and made him come and join this work. So this is the meaning of being together. Yes, onion does work. There's a couple other things if you really want to know. Any citric pretty much works. So if you have a lemon or an orange on any cloth and just have it on your nose and mouth, it should help you not suffocate or get tear gas. I should be charging for this. I had a friend. This is kind of how the world works. I had a friend when the protests were happening in Nicaragua call me and says, "We're dealing with tear gas. We don't know what to do. Can you tell me what you did in Palestine?" And I was sending him all these recipes of, here's one. If you don't have this, here's the second option. Here's the third option. So some hands earlier. Yes.
You described
disillusionment and the transformation that you're having. The average Israeli soldier, is it dependent upon them to do it, have experience what you experience, or to develop that within themselves? Or how do you present what your organization does to people who maybe have not yet been transformed, or not totally little delusions? I don't know if I guessed that right, but
I think I understood. Well, first of all, I think that this disillusionment that I experienced is not mine alone, but it's part of the army experience. You think you're going to like fight the bad guys and be like in Star Wars, and in the end you're like a cog in a really dumb, useless machine. As armies go, you know, the Israeli army is particular. In that, there's all the ideological apparatus and the belief that we're doing something extremely important and that we're actually protecting our homes and our families that kind of carries you through that. But you know, when you're in the army and you see how this all works and the incredible waste and just how stupid it all is, it's very hard not to like. It's not by accident that Catch 22 is still a very popular book among soldiers. In my particular case, both since I was struck very close to home, so the illusion that I'm protecting anything or anyone kind of disappeared, and also, anyway, the circumstances of my service where I saw how little we contribute to the security of Israel and to what extent we just play a deadly game of catch with Hezbollah in Lebanon or with the Palestinian factions in the occupied territories. I mean, this kind of the conjunction of these two things made me change my mind. But again, talking to other soldiers, talking to other veterans of the Israeli army, we might differ on our conclusions, but not really on the experience. And again, I mean, I work here also with veteran organizations. This is not really, it's not that different. It's kind of a universal soldier experience. Now, there is a serious problem, always was and still is, for us to call directly on people to refuse. This is illegal. This is very problematic. In the beginning, at least, this could interfere with our possibility to work in many spaces in Israel, etc. And also, I must say, I don't think that you can convince someone not to go. I really, really, really tried to convince my kid brother not to go. And I was like, I mean, you saw everything I went through. You saw both your brothers went through. And he still wanted to go. You live in this society, it's a decision someone has to come to on their own. And again, I mean, I think that, but that's the method that we came up with, both in the parent circle and in Combatants for Peace, and in general, and that is of telling our story, of believing in some, I don't know, some basic kind of humanity that we all share, and that if I tell my story, it might impress people in a certain way, they might be touched in a certain way, and then who knows where it would lead. It makes the work very hard to quantify. It makes our success very hard to gauge. But we know, I mean, we hear stories and we hear cases and we see people come and join us and be with us. We know of Palestinian kids who decided, again, not to give up on the liberation of Palestine, fight fiercely against the occupation, but differently, without sacrificing their young lives. In a way that, I mean, this can be open for discussion, but in a way, I think that fundamentally serves the Israeli perspective. For the same token, I can tell of other people, Israeli people, who were deep in despair and completely lost and bitter, not talking about myself, but also others who really found meaning, who really found sense in this type of work. But again, as I said, we can't call on people and we can't promise them also, we can't tell them to leave the army. We can't promise them it will be better if they join us. We can tell them what it did for us. And I mean, hope they'll listen. And I think in general, in human relations, there has to be this space for people to make up their mind, to come to their conclusions, to join the fight on their own terms.
To what end Hamas will still be there? So how can your work basically really do a macro change with these organizations like Hamas? Right. Sorry, I missed that part. And the militant right wing. Let me see where to start. I would say we got where we are because we believe that violence, power, strength is the only path. Hamas only started in 87. It didn't actually exist before. And I know from one of our members, I was doing a talk with one of our Israeli members who was talking about how in his military service, he was given money and was delivered to Hamas leaders, not because they loved Hamas, but because they saw them as an alternative to the PLO. And so get Hamas stronger. I worked in Afghanistan. The US did the same with what ended up becoming Al Qaeda with Taliban as well. It's the same story. Let's help somebody to go against another. We also Israel in Lebanon went in 82 to try to kick out the PLO from South Lebanon. Ended up with Hezbollah, which was established. Yes, what year? 82. Violence will only lead. It can help on a short term. And in our history, we've only trusted that through war, through military, through violence, we will get stuff done. And it has not. So I would argue, yeah, maybe what we're talking about sounds a bit naive, but it hasn't been really tried. Definitely not at a macro level. Never, for us to go into a school in Israel or in Palestine, the amount of work we had to put to talk about, we didn't call for don't go to the army, we didn't say don't do this, just to tell our stories about how my brother was killed, about how Elik's sister was killed, and how we became friends. Simple. The amount of opposition from the institutions that we faced was absurd, beyond absurd. And you think, what is so scary with our story? Why is that something no one, in the institutions, in the government wants to listen to? So I think the only way you get rid of terrible ideology is by promoting the ideology we're talking about. You cannot, and we see it already. I think everyone thought Israel will get in, after October 7th. I can tell you many in the leadership in the Arab countries, I think, thought within a month, within a few weeks, Hamas will be defeated, it'll be all over, it's all done. We can see that it's not, I think everybody now looks and says, even if Hamas militarily is defeated, the anger is still there. And that's not going anywhere. You can defeat Hamas militarily, but it's not going to go the people, the kids, the 1-point-something million people who ended up losing 1.5, 1.6 million people who lost their homes. It can be named something else. It might not be Hamas, it'll be some new name. It doesn't matter. You need to give hope. You need to give alternative. You need to give vision. And we cannot fight against whether Hamas or whether Ben Gvir or whether any of these kind of people without offering something different. And what we're trying to do is offering something different. Now, I have to say, we're not only fighting against radicals, we're fighting against institutions. And that's the biggest problem. You cannot anymore, even the parent circle, which tries extremely hard to stay careful about every word they say, was not allowed anymore into schools in Israel.
Could you explain
the parent circle is a group of Palestinians and Israelis like Elik and me who lost family members in the conflict. And people can be more center, more left, but It doesn't call for against service, for example, in the army. It doesn't really take any strong political positions. It's just that we want to show that being together works, and we want to tell our stories. Since the new government was sworn in, they were not allowed anymore into schools. For the last 20 some years, actually more, maybe almost 30 years, the organization has done hundreds, sometimes thousands of meetings in high schools. This has stopped last year since this government has started. So we are fighting against much stronger, unfortunately, powers, but we don't have any other answer. What else can we do? It's either, like Alex said, it's either despair or we're gonna do our best. And we prefer to do our best. Now there are members among us who try crazy stuff. I can tell you, I tried to run for mayor of Jerusalem to change exactly that. Some people here know how that ended. Very stupid idea. But I did it to challenge again the political structure, the status quo. I don't regret doing it. But I realized that the powers that really don't want change are very, very significant, and they are in high places. I also realized, we talk about America. I reach out to American politicians, not one of them would respond. I reach out to American organizations, nonprofits, not one of them wanted to respond. I reach out to the Europeans. They all told me, sorry, we're not going to get involved. And I didn't reach out to say, support me. I reached out to say, support Palestinians in East Jerusalem to vote. They don't get any advertisement about voting. It's their rights, right? In the US, you go and help people know, get out to vote kind of stuff. Just help them to know they have the right to vote. Most Palestinians don't even know in East Jerusalem they can vote for a municipality because we can't vote for the Knesset. So they assume they can't vote for anything. Just help them find that out. Couldn't get anybody. Most who I've talked to, even in governments, ambassadors, European ambassadors who day and night talk about how much they love Palestinians and that everybody will tell you they're pro-Palestinians, BS, because I'll go and talk to them and they'll say, I agree with you, but my government says we can't get involved.
Why is that?
I think a lot of people supported the status quo. As much as they spoke against it, they supported it. And unfortunately, until something horrific happened, like what happened on October 7th and what's happening in Gaza now, no one wants to talk. No one wants to do anything. They assume by maintaining the status quo, they don't deal with the problem. You kind of kick it down. The Biden administration until October 7th, if you talk to anybody in State Department, I've lived in DC, so every now and then I'll show up there, or anybody within the administration, they'll tell you this is not a priority. That wasn't even a secret. They said this whole Israel-Palestine thing is not a priority. What's a priority? To help Israel get relationship with Saudi Arabia, but ignore Palestine, assuming that everything is fine. And you could swear and you can scream and you can do everything you can to say this is a ticking bomb. Something will happen. You cannot continue the occupation as is forever, not expect something bad to happen. And you couldn't get any response. I think 10 days before, there was an American official bragging on some panel about how they succeeded in maintaining calm through the Biden administration, Israel and Palestine. Here's where we are.
Oh, yeah. I like what you said about being in an echo chamber, kind of like hearing your own thoughts shouted back to you and how that isn't helpful. So do you have any tips when we do venture to talk to someone who has completely opposite views as us? Any tips to kind of better help communication?
There's a very good book in the back. I do actually, I'm joking and serious. I do have a lot of stuff about that. I think if you're talking to someone in the beginning, like if I'm talking to Elik, we'll argue. It's fine. We're friends, so we can handle it. That's different. But if you're talking to somebody you've never talked to and you have different opinions, I would use totally a different strategy. The first thing I would do is if you just start lecturing them, they're not going to listen. I would say try to listen what they think, where they're coming from. Try to understand their story, not just their position, but their story. In Israel and in Palestine, that's always my strategy. Is like, why you hurting? What's making you speak with that anger? There's always a reason behind. Definitely in Israel and Palestine. Here, sometimes it's a bit different, but they might have watched something, seen something, heard something. They might have a connection. They might have a family member. So I try to know what's behind it and listen as much as I can before speaking. And then when I speak, I don't go quickly to political positions. I try to tell stories. Like Elik mentioned earlier, stories might make people think. It doesn't drive people away right away. And it does work. And again, not only in Israel and Palestine, one of the people I really admire is a guy named Daryl Davis. And Daryl is a black musician, very unique guy, and he's been in the last 20 some years have been helping KKK guys leave their organization. And when I asked him how he did it, he says, I sometimes sit for an hour and I just this KKK guy will go blah 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 blah, and he'll say the most offensive, awful stuff. And he's like, and I listen to everything, and I listen without even making smirking looks or look like I don't care. I listen attentively, and then after I say, I listen to everything. Can I tell you my story? And his personal story usually demolishes all those arguments, like you all live on welfare, you all, the normal generalizing, all Palestinians this, all Jews that. And it's been incredibly successful for him. It's been, I think, successful for us. Elik and I have been to classrooms, have spoken at to Israeli soldiers. And it's incredible to hear how little they know. To me, it's always amazing. You sent to the West Bank as a soldier, and you literally know so little, if anything, about Palestinians. So they have a million questions. I've taken Rami quite often, Elik's dad, to East Jerusalem schools, and the same, they had so many questions. There's a lot of curiosity. And as you tell stories, people do change through listening to stories.
Why did you go to study Hebrew? What made you
Why did I go to study Hebrew in Opan? I didn't do it because I was like, oh, this is it, reconciliation. I did it out of necessity. If you don't speak Hebrew in Jerusalem, it's a big problem. You're not going to go to work. You're not going to study. You pretty much accept that you're in the bottom of poverty, and you'll be the lowest class in the city. Growing up, I refused to study Hebrew because of my brother. And at 18, I realized, okay, that's a problem. I now need to learn it. And the best place to study Hebrew is Ulpan, which is where Jewish immigrants go to learn Hebrew. And I was the only Palestinian in my class.
And maybe ever in the history of
Okay, I have a question back here.
You spoke earlier about how people, even people in Israel, now after the campaign, are reacting to abuse violence. Can you talk about that?
Elik, if you can repeat the question.
You mean Israeli?
Yeah, you spoke about it.
I'll repeat the question about why people in the Israelis are reluctant to identify with the peace camp or change their position regarding peace after October 7th. I think there are several reasons. I think the first one is really, to a certain extent, the shock of what happened on October 7th, the violence and the atrocities that took place there. And I mean, this has absolutely everything to do with what has been just said. Israelis don't know shit about what we do and about what goes on in the occupied territories. When a young high school kid goes to the army and goes to the occupied territories, it's like someone from Iowa going to Afghanistan. They don't know anything, not the history, not the culture, not the geography, nothing. There hasn't been an Israeli reporter in Gaza since, I think, 2006 or something, that we only rely. Maybe there was one or two lunatics who snuck in, but there's no reporting, there is nothing. So when all this happened, why? Why did we deserve it? How? They're animals. And I think this is not that the Israelis are stupid. I mean, there is a realization, though, that to explain how and why, we'll have to look in the mirror. And this is something very challenging for many Israelis. I think also at this moment, there is something very gratifying and comforting, being part of a righteous camp that stands together. And to speak bluntly, over the last year or so, before October, there was the huge protests in Israel against the Netanyahu government that are unprecedented, that were amazing mobilization, but that in a certain way got stuck, constantly not passing a certain point. Because, like white first Israel would not recognize its wrongdoings towards people of color in Israel and towards Palestinians, and in that sense could not really draw any one of these crowds into the demonstrations, any one of these crowds to unite against the extreme right-wing government of Netanyahu. And I think the inability to talk about these past legacies, these wrongdoings of Israel was really something that was stifling the protest, or stopping it dead in its track. And in a sense, Hamas solved it for us. Because, we don't need to talk to the Palestinians now. Some of them were cheering when this happened. Some of them were posting like pictures of, I don't know, there was the victory shakshuka, if you heard about that. There were all kinds of preposterous things. And we don't need to talk to them. And with the other kind of Mizrahi population in Israel, now we're all together because Hamas hates us all equally. And there is something extremely comforting about that absurdly, this is also precisely the plan of the radical settlers and of Hamas, to bring the situation to such an extreme that all divisions will be forgotten. This is how, by the way, also the alt-right movements in this state believe if you do something that will finally start the race war, will finally start the all-out confrontation with the Palestinians or with the Arab world, like if they blow up the Temple Mount or something like that, all these dumb divisive questions like whether or not we should colonize and have an apartheid rule over the Palestinians will go away and we'll all be together. In a certain sense, this is what happened on October 7, giving a lot of people this blessed release from the need to think and be critical about the situation. But I think the most important factor, and this goes back to the question there, what's the point? Why would people do that? It can really mess up your life. To take political action, you need some horizon of hope. You need some, even the slightest promise that this will amount to something. And first of all, as Aziz told, the international political system and discourse is completely either indifferent or unsupportive towards non-violent joint endeavors to resolve the situation. They're extremely attentive to violence, but not to anything else. So we see what works. And speaking out, unless you're really like messed up in the head like we are, is just not worth it. Right? I give just a small example. My mother lost her job recently. She was fired from the university where she worked because, she said very basically what I said here. She quoted in a private WhatsApp conversation Jean-Paul Sartre from his introduction to Fanon's book, Le Damné de la Terre, The Wretched of the Earth, where he says, you had your boot on their neck for so many years. Now when it's lifted, What did you think you'll meet? A gaze of gratitude? This was an internal conversation between colleagues. Someone snitched and she was fired. When the dismissal did not hold, because after all, there is for Jews laws in Israel that protect workers, and they had to rescind the resignation. They leaked it to the press, where a major journalist put out an article that was, this close to libel, saying my mother, who lost her daughter to Hamas murderers, is supporting Hamas and cheering for the massacre. Now, of course, this is bullshit, and we can complain, and they issued an apology. But, one article was on page 1, the apology was a week later on page 7. Who remembers? And my mother had to leave Israel after 2 months of non-stop rape and death wishes that she's been getting, in a campaign that is orchestrated by the General Students' Union in Israel. Now, of course, none of her colleagues, none of her students protested against her. It's only people who don't know, it's only people who are kind of part of this coming together feeling, nobody that has a personal connection with the person or with the story. And yeah, this was a nightmare. And my mother, she stopped, finally she resigned from the university. She said without an apology, she will not come back and they will not apologize. So the story is over. And that's it for my mother. There are many others who had it much, much worse. And of course, if they're Palestinian, if they're Mizrahi, women, or of color from the periphery, it's a genuine risk. And why would anyone take this risk in this situation? And this is, again, kind of going back to what we do. And that is, if there's even a sliver of hope, people will do incredible things. And, I grew up during Oslo. Terrible agreement, all the criticism is justified, ruined our lives. But for a moment, it gave people hope. And people who were die-hard killers before changed. And I believe that if we are capable of somehow presenting something like what we do as a genuine, viable hope, things will change. Things will immediately change. But unless there is hope, unless there's a certain promise that you're not going to sacrifice yourself in some suicidal manner, yeah, people will always take this position. They're not idiots.
I think in times like this, people revert to tribalism very quickly. I think for some Palestinian peace activists, they feel it's very hard right now to come out and speak as things happening in Gaza, as the bombing is going on, and hundreds of people getting killed sometimes daily. And so they feel by coming out and doing something even like we doing now, they're almost selling out, they're almost betraying. They find it really, really difficult to do that. And I understand that, but I think it goes back to which sides do you think exist? I again don't think we are on the same and the opposite sides. So it's when you draw these lines like Alex said, is like the coming together. It's harder to criticize your own government in a war. We know this from the United States as well. Every time the US goes to war, it takes forever until people go, okay, maybe we shouldn't have been in Afghanistan. Maybe we shouldn't have been in Iraq. Maybe, but in the beginning, anybody who criticized the war, I remember the war in Iraq when people were speaking up, they were like traitors. You couldn't say no. And the same for, I think, Israelis and Palestinians now. Palestinians have hard time, even those who cannot stand Hamas, even those who hate Hamas, find it hard to right now go and speak against them because they're like, they're being bombed. How am I going to speak up against them right now? And people who, you hear it a lot, and I hear it from even people I know that surprise me in Israel who would say, well, we in a war right now. We not going to go into criticisms of anybody. I think that's a mistake. I think you should be able to speak up because we need some sane voices. And at this point, I think there are less sane voices than should be. And so those of us who are speaking loud get also more criticism because it's not as common. Well, Israelis decided, a lot of the job providers are Israelis for people in East Jerusalem, and many decided that they're not interested in hiring Palestinians anymore. Some Palestinians were afraid to go work for Israelis after as well. I have one cousin who went to he does windows, and he went to install a window, and the guy thought he was an Israeli Jew, so he was telling him, oh, if they send me a Palestinian, I would have punched the crap out of him. And he's like, oh, good, they sent me. And he went after he finished that job and quit, because like I'm not gonna risk my life for this job. So you have that reality. Some in my family didn't leave for the first 30 days, did not leave their homes at all. And then you add to it the friends and the families we have, connections we have in Gaza, and that's horrifying because in most cases we are not able often to know what's going on. So you only get news every few days, and often it's about who do you know who's being killed. And it becomes, unfortunately, in some ways, it becomes a normal daily update of. I know how to say this and not sound minimizing anything for Israeli pain, but I know how bad it felt on October 7th because I also have Israeli friends who lost family members. But it almost feels for many Palestinians that the October 7th is repeated. Every 3 days you have 1,000 people often killed, every 4 days, every 5 days. And so it's an ongoing thing, and it is so hard to emotionally, mentally deal with it. Yeah, and I think it's making our work extremely also harder. It's making our work with family, with friends. You know, if I'm doing this work, my family are supportive, but I know there are people in my extended family who think you're being crazy. I know there are friends who, think this is, how could you go and talk about peace and coexistence right now? If you do a poll, which there has been polls among Israelis and Palestinians, this is the time where you have the least support for peace, I think, since polling on this issue has started. So I hope that answers your question. And even just one thing, even to take it more, I'm pissing off some people. I'm actually even taking a group in March going there. And even though my family want me to go to see them, they're like, it's too dangerous, are you crazy? No, I think we'll be fine, but I think it's important to show up, and my parents are like, no, maybe stay in America a little longer, you don't need to bring a group right now.
Elik, you said before, Hamas are not Nazis, and I'm Israeli, and I dare to say Israelis are Nazis right now.
So on that, okay, we have a lot of questions. We have some questions from Zoom as well. Is everybody back on Zoom? Sorry, we had a technical difficulty. I think we're not going to be able to have everyone's questions, but let me just read the questions from Zoom so that we know what they are. You don't have to answer all of them. The first was for Aziz. You grew up in Jerusalem. Despite the unbearable tragedy of losing your brother, you still had access to non-military Israelis. You studied Hebrew. Those who live in Gaza and the West Bank are sequestered from these types of corrective interactions. Don't you think this speaks to the wisdom of a one-state solution where all can live together? There should be a two-state solution at minimum, but my concern is it will perpetuate the separate daily experiences of two peoples who might do better when they share daily lives in one state. They wonder about Elik's thoughts on this too. Let me read the, so there's that question. And then sort of straightforward question, not easy, but what do you think of the conflict in Gaza being defined as a genocide, which speaks to the Nazi question as well, maybe? How do you speak about what's happening in a way that acknowledges pain on all sides while also recognizing unbalanced power dynamics In a coexisting situation, how do you envision people to heal from this? And finally, as someone who was not familiar with the phrase from the river to the sea, it seems to have multiple meanings and generate strong reactions. Is it a phrase that should be used in any context? And I think that's it. Yeah, so the use of genocide, the use of from the river to the sea, and then the question of one or two state solution. So you should be able to, we have 10 minutes, 8 minutes.
Yes, no, yes, no, no, no. Let's see. I think ideally one state solution is my favorite. I don't know if it's possible, especially now. But again, ideally, that would be the best. I think Gili and I are big supporters of the idea of a confederation, which kind of brings the two together. You still have two states, but you have open land and people can cross between the borders, but there are no hard borders. For those who don't know, it's how do you call it? Land for All. Yeah, Land for All is an organization that does that, and I think it's a brilliant idea. So I would encourage people to look into that. That's more where I am right now. I've moved around between two states, one state, to Land for All. So who knows, next time you ask me what my answer would be. From the river to the sea, I honestly think people made more out of this than it ever meant. I've never met a Palestinian who meant it. Of the people I know, and I know people of all kind of ideas, of meant it as anti-Semitic or kill the Jews or genocide. Well, some people probably mean that, I'm sure. Yeah, but well, I was gonna go into the Likud thing in a second, but I think people can find something in anything they want. I think if you're talking about the way I read it is from the river to the sea, everyone needs to be free. And for us, it's called Palestine. For Israelis, they'll call it Israel. I think the idea is a freedom and equality needs to exist between the river and the sea. That's how I see it. I never really thought of it as something racist until I start hearing people saying that. Now, ironically, like somebody mentioned here, the Likud, what do you call it, manifesto says the same term. From the river to the sea, there'll be only Israeli sovereignty, which Netanyahu has recently repeated it, but somehow that's not offensive. I think we have to be a little thicker skinned anyway, and not right away being, oh, they want to just all kill us, they all hate us. I think give people sometimes at least benefit of the doubt, in the sense this from the river to the sea question. And then the final one was
genocide.
About the genocide.
What you call it genocide?
Look, I don't care if you want to call it genocide or not. I think there are crimes happening. The amount of kids and women being killed should not be acceptable for anyone. I'm going to say something maybe more offensive than calling it a genocide. When your numbers of civilians killed are higher than Hamas numbers, or, the ones who supposedly went looking for civilians. When you're having higher number of civilians killed in military operations that supposedly avoids killing civilians, you got to ask some questions. You got to say, really, are you really avoiding killing civilians? And the stories, at least I hear from the people I know in Gaza, the answer is no. The answer is civilians were targeted. Last story just came out yesterday of this girl with her family who've been bombed or shot, and two girls survived, and one of them called asking for help, and as she's talking on the phone, she gets killed, and then a 6-year-old is left. 24 hours later, I was checking today, neither is the team who went to find her or she has been heard of yet. That shouldn't be happening. If you're trying not to kill civilians, that shouldn't be happening. Now, I know not every Israeli soldier who's fighting Gaza is going there killing civilians, sure, but there's definitely an easy on the trigger kind of thing. And then the same in the West Bank. Settlers who've killed Palestinians in the last 3 months, and there are so many stories of point blank shots, not one person being arrested. You can't say we are a country of law and order, and you have a settler goes to a guy picking olives in October, shoots him, and walks away, and nothing happens. You can't go and kick people. Yeah, you can't go and kick people out of their villages, 11 villages, 12 villages, and not a one person be arrested. Like, can you imagine if it's vice versa? Like, that's to me the craziness. Like, if you don't want people to say it's not a, you really care about civilians' life, there's so much that needs to be done to do that, and very little, if any, is.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, it's Sana, and then maybe you already had a question, I think. Is that right? No. Did you already speak? Okay.
Well, I'd like to.
Okay, so we'll just do 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then I think we have to. Yeah, we have to sort of finally close up because people need to go home who are holding space open for us.
I'm here all night.
Thank you. I'll ask maybe the quicker question then. So I hear a lot about the beauty of uniting forces here, and I hear a lot about how the power of meeting people and being educated, even finding out about the Nakba or the Holocaust, is unlocked societally. And I'm curious if there's any precedent that you've seen or that you're aware of as well of efforts to change the education system. And I know that regulating education is extremely dangerous, and we're seeing the side effects of it domestically, but just to force the introduction of learning about the other side, is there anything historically that happened?
You want to start? You don't want them to first all go and then answer?
Sure. Why not?
Yeah. So amidst all these things you've been describing of the increasingly entrenched tribalism, the hostility towards the peace movement, meanwhile, interviews with people from the leaders of Standing Together and Breaking Silence say that they are getting record numbers of new members. So I would ask you, Elik, whether you actually are seeing that as maybe a real trend also within Jewish Israel, and to you, Aziz, whether you are seeing any kind of trend of people saying, maybe we need to join the peace movement, the truth movement, and at the same time among the Palestinians.
Okay, and now we have more here.
Yes, this is for Elik. You seem to be very confident that things would change almost immediately between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I wish I could be that confident about it. When I see videos of crowds of people marauding through streets of, say, Jerusalem and chanting "Death to the Arabs," or I see news videos of the settlers harassing Palestinian farmers and included. But how can they undo this ingrained, inculcated hatred overnight? I think
Can I just do a plug for our tour? But the suspense. So Combatants are having our first.
This is Elik Elhanan. He's the chairman of the board of American Friends for Combatants for Peace.
And activists are guests. Two most inspiring human beings. I had the pleasure to meet. Such a special night. But we have a tour for the first time since COVID. Our activists are coming together to LA, Washington D.C., which is very important, and also New York City. Here will be at Central next. It's going to be the week of the 14th of February, because the movement held together and demonstrated what is possible. We infuse these ideas into the consciousness, and they're extremely important because they're joint and they're conceived together and they're worked out together, which is extremely important. Whatever the future brings, we'll need to fight it together. We need to learn, build this muscle, build this consciousness. We can do it. So we're coming to New York on the 14th, 15th, and 16th. We're extremely honored to be hosted by Central Synagogue, one of the leading synagogues in the country, will give us a main stage. Also on the 14th at Judson Memorial, one of the leading churches in America with a great history of racial and social justice, and also CBST, the largest synagogue on the Friday on Shabbat, will be at Shabbat at CBST, the largest LGBTQ synagogue in the world, which is hosting us. The great Sharon Kleinbaum has been a great friend to the movement. We just did an iftar in Bejala this year with the movement together. So if you have a chance, tell your friends if they're interested in joint work in this lane that's extremely crucial and extremely difficult, but extremely necessary as we're facing a truly horrifying reality in Gaza as well as Israel. So
is there somewhere that we can get information?
Yes.
About?
So if you Google American Friends of Combatants for Peace, so the American Friends of Combatants for Peace, you get to our website. In our website, you'll have the information. You can always reach out to me or through anybody who got here to me and sign up to our email list. And if you have friends in LA, if you have friends in Washington, D.C., you can also check out those locations. And it's really extraordinary. Our friend Suli's coming, another co-founder of the movement, somebody who had to think about these for a long time and chart this path and think about going forward. So, and we have Chen Alon, another co-founder, extraordinary, one of the highest ranking Israeli officers, I think, in the movement.
He was a major. Right?
He was a major, so he's coming as well. And we feel a thirst from Washington and feel a thirst from the community and from the left in America and NGOs to hear about this perspective, how the movement thinks, how the movement operates and navigates extremely difficult reality on the ground, in grounds it in resistance, grounds it in doing. Like Aziz said, the bonds are forged in the resistance itself, which is extremely extraordinary. So thank you so much. Sorry for the suspense, the answers, but thank you so much. Look out for me, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do we log on afcfp.org for the events?
Yes, absolutely.
American Friends of Combatants for Peace, afcfp.org.
So, yeah.
I'll answer very
Educational reform
educational. I
precedents.
forgot the middle one.
Trends, positive trends.
Yeah,
Okay.
standing together, breaking the silence.
I mean, the educational, at least in Israel, I mean, it's constantly there's a pushback. I mean, back and forth. It depends who's the Minister of Education, and there were periods that were very different. The recent many years have been very, very have been very dark. Now, not to. My mother is a scholar of the Israeli education system, and she wrote a couple of books exactly about this topic. It is a very big problem as progressively over the past 20 years, even more since the 90s, the Israeli education system does everything it can to close off debate and not to open it. And in a sense, create this reality that I talked about, where young Israeli soldiers have no idea where they're going, even if they're going 10 minutes from their homes. This is definitely something to push against. This is something that we have been pushing against, and our presence in schools have been very important and influential in that sense, but it's constantly a fight. And there is, from the Ministry of Education and from other organs, there's a very, very big pushback. And as I said, we kind of were defeated last year when this terrible government completely suspended our permission to go into school. However, we constantly, and this is the thing I wanted to say, and this is in regards to the last question about the hate. I mean, these situations are always dynamic. You know, everything, not to expose my political leanings too much, but things are dialectical. You know, you have certain powers and powers push back. Whenever the Ministry of Education brings out their racist bullshit and forces teachers to teach them, there will be a teacher that will bring us in. When there is the hatred, there are people also who would want to live differently. There are, and knowing how to play these powers, I think this is the art of politics, and this is the art of activism, and to a certain extent, I think we a little bit forgot about. This is not something that is resolved overnight. This is not something that will resolve in a campaign. This is not something that I can give a solution. But through hard, judicial, attentive work, things can change. And we've seen these changes in the past. You know, Israel had an ambassador in Germany a mere 14 years after its establishment. And we are not talking about, this is, I mean, Germany. So things can change. Now, it's exactly, I mean, what we've seen it many times. We've seen it on many occasions. I think the racism and kind of, and I'll say it blatantly, the genocidal behavior of the Israeli government, that kind of, I don't know if I'll qualify, this is a legal argument, I don't know if I'll qualify what's happening in Gaza as a genocide or just a monstrous, unprecedented, unacceptable war crime or crime against humanity, but there are definitely genocidal elements within Israeli politics and within Israeli society that speaks unabashedly about this as a positive thing. And people see this happening. If it's like the horrific, I mean, what got into Israeli mentality beyond kind of the walls of silencing, when the practice of shooting Palestinians, particularly when they surrendered, cost the lives of 3 hostages that managed to somehow miraculously and bravely escape and survive in the war zone, they were murdered by Israeli snipers who knew they're surrendering. So these things seep through, and people oppose. People are outraged. People, it can be for the most selfish reasons, the Israeli officers that are afraid that their ski holidays will be jeopardized because what happened in The Hague, or it can be just profound moral objections, or it can be anything in between. But these things are there, and we need to be attentive to them. And as long as we're attentive to them, we don't lose hope. And as long as we don't lose hope, we can overcome hate. They murdered my sister. I overcame that. I am somewhere else now. I'm not different than anyone else. Anyone, I mean, this possibility is open for anyone.
Hard to follow that. I think there are many people, I'll start with the question in the back. There are many people who have left the movement. There's a lot of fractures, but there are also new people joining. I wouldn't say we have record numbers of people joining the movement because we have a lot of people also who've left. I think there are definitely people who are coming and going out and protesting, and that's really good. And I'm happy to see that's going on. But I wouldn't say it's anywhere as we hope numbers wise where it would be. I think there's tons more work that needs to be done. And maybe I'll give a positive example as well. Like, as I've seen some people I know who are like, I don't believe in this is it, or they only would talk about the thing they care about and suddenly zero empathy. I've also seen people who completely, like, you wouldn't have expected them to come out. I have one of my one of my colleagues whose cousin was killed on October 7th, and he was one of the most outspoken people against the war from day one. You have people like Mao Zedong, who, wasn't known in the peace movement. He's a colleague. We worked in tourism together. He's been pro-peace all his life, but he wasn't like the leader going and speaking at rallies and stuff. And his parents were killed on October 7th. And today he's in every rally. He's the first person there. He's not doing really anything else now. That's all he's doing is meeting people, talking to people. I'm with him on the phone at least once a week. And he's doing so much stuff. And this is a guy that, 5 months ago would not have been there. So we are also gaining new committed people who are working hard and who are trying to make a difference. Unfortunately, too many are people who came to it like us after experiencing a tragedy themselves. And the hope is to convince more and more people to be as committed without having to go through this tragedy. Now, also, not everyone who lost a family member is suddenly pro-peace. There are also those who've gone, obviously, the other way completely. But that's regarding the trends. I think there's so much work that needs to be done, and it's going to be a hard campaign to get there. On education, I honestly gave up on the system. There are a couple of schools like Hand in Hand, which I love, and I think what they do is incredible. And they have Israeli and Arab kids who are Palestinian citizens of Israel in a school together. They have multiple schools, but those are a handful. We need hundreds more of these schools. These are private schools. So again, they're incredible, but not many of those exist. There are people that, again, Elik and I would know, some who've worked with your mother, like Sami Atwan and like Ayam Naveh and all these who tried to do dual narrative education books, and schools were not allowed to teach them. So much was put into it. Obviously, teachers were able to read them and use them from their own knowledge, but teachers were told you're not allowed to use them. And both in the West Bank and in Israel, teachers were told no. So where I'm putting my focus is instead, how do you reach people, students outside? And that's a project I'm working on right now. It's really in its beginning, so I have nothing to show you, but the goal will be to create an online education materials that people can go to and create materials for where people are. So on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, on all these platforms that often are not the greatest space for peace building. I think one mistake peace building organizations, movements, so on have done is we don't go to people where they are. And my hope, the work I want to be focused on in the next couple of years, is to figure out where people are, how can I get to them, and what materials can I create that will make them go through some kind of transformation. But schools are not going to be, unfortunately, the place to start. I don't see, even if tomorrow there's an election and Yair Lapid wins, and then there's an election in the West Bank, and I don't know who's gonna, God knows who can take over there. Probably Abu Mazen again, still young, 86. So. Even Biden's like, I'm younger. So we have to, I think, change our thinking and go around the institutions.
I think, unfortunately, we have to wrap up because we're over time, but please join me in thanking